Alright guys, Bettrmma is back. Thank you once again for joining me. If you don't want to hear an over-emotional guy screaming in his room like the MMA guru, and you don't want to get bad picks and bad takes on the UFC from guys like Lucas Tracy, then you're in the place to be. You're here watching Bettrmma, the best MMA ASMR on MMA YouTube. So thank you guys for joining me. Let's jump right into the main event with Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis 2 in their rematch. I picked Brendan Allen, and this fight pretty much went the way that I expected. In my picks video, I gave more credit to Brendan Allen than he showed he deserved in this fight. I was expecting Brendan Allen to be able to implement a strong enough chain wrestling ground-based game plan to eventually get the submission on Chris Curtis. I gave Brendan that much credit because what was also evidenced in the fight, Brendan did not have a hard time getting Chris to the ground or taking down Chris, and he did not have a hard time getting Chris Curtis's back. And those were things that I saw flashes of in their first fight and flashes of in Brendan Allen's grappling acumen throughout his career. He went for a heel hook at one point that made things interesting. But all credit to Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis has great striking defense, and he does work great when standing in the pocket and throwing boxing combinations. He throws great punches to the body, great hooks over the top, counter shots. The real detriment to Chris Curtis's game are straight punches and long attacks at range. So Brendan Allen's oblique kick, I thought, was one of, if not his best tools throughout the fight. We all know from those that receive damage from the oblique kick how much they hate it. I almost wish Brendan Allen relied on that more throughout the fight. But Brendan Allen's straight punches looked good. His 1-2 looked good. And when he was able to fight at distance and at range and use straight punches, he looked good throughout the fight. When he would stand more so in the pocket and let Chris throw counter shots back, that's when things would get shaky for Brendan Allen. There are people saying that this is somehow a robbery, that Chris Curtis should have won. Now, I'm not going to make a whole video about what is a robbery and what isn't, but if it's a close fight, it's not a robbery, okay? This was a close fight. So if you just want to argue that Chris Curtis won, that's fine. But if you're arguing that Chris Curtis obviously whooped Brendan Allen's ass and that we're all crazy for thinking Brendan Allen should have won, that's not the right use of the word robbery. Now, I rewatched the fight right after it happened. And particularly, I watched the last 3 rounds. Brendan Allen clearly won the 4th and 5th round, in my opinion. Yes, he did get rocked in one of those rounds. He was out-voluming Chris Curtis. He was taking him down at will. He was controlling him in the grappling. He was threatening rear naked chokes all throughout the 4th round. It was very clear that the 4th round was Brendan Allen's, even though Chris Curtis had his moments on the feet. You can't give it to Chris Curtis for landing a few good-looking shots when Brendan Allen is still throwing volume back, landing the same amount of punches, on top of that, dominating and controlling the grappling exchanges. Now, in the 5th round, I believe this is where Brendan Allen got hurt, if I'm not mistaken, but at the end of the day, Chris Curtis got hurt at the end of the 5th round. And I would also say that in the 5th round, Brendan Allen was still out-grappling and out-voluming Chris Curtis on the feet. Brendan Allen outworked Chris Curtis at the end of the day. And I think it was a rightful decision to give him at least 3 rounds of the fight. He at least won one of the rounds in the first 3. And in my opinion, he clearly won 4 and 5. MMA has become so big and casuals are so rampant that people use the term robbery. And I gotta say, even guys like Lucas Tracy, he said 99% of robberies are close fights. That makes absolutely no sense. Because if they were close fights, it makes it impossible to be a robbery. The whole idea of a robbery is that you are robbed by the judges. So, for example, Kevin Randleman versus Bas Rutten, Paddy Pimblett versus Gordon, Kennedy Izinchukwu versus Nikolai Nigamaranu, Khalil Roundtree versus Dustin Jacoby. These are very recent fights that are robberies. And the reason that they don't get recognized and talked about as robberies by the MMA media is because oftentimes, like Pimblett, Roundtree, and Jacoby, these are guys outside of the top 15 that nobody even really cares that much about. The entire reason why the Pimblett decision got so much noise is just because of how high profile Paddy Pimblett is. This was in no means a robbery. Whether you're saying it's for Chris Curtis or Brendan Allen, it's a close fight. So close fight and robbery, they just shouldn't be brought up in the same conversation unless you're making the point that they're not the same thing. It's just too easy with Lucas Tracy, the Charlie Brown of MMA YouTube. I was hoping that Brendan Allen could put on a bigger performance, make a title contending argument, but at the end of the day, I think Chris Curtis is just a very, very tough stylistic matchup for Brendan Allen because Brendan Allen is a real dude. He likes to fight and get dirty in the pocket. That's Chris Curtis's realm, so Chris Curtis is going to give you some if that's what you're looking for. I think Brendan Allen honestly could give Dricus du Plessis a great fight. I think he is a very good stylistic matchup for Dricus du Plessis. So I'm hoping that they try and match up Dricus with somebody. Probably they're going to try and make the Dricus Izzy fight. So either they match up Brendan Allen with Sean Strickland to get a number one contenders fight for the winner of Dricus du Plessis, Israel Adesanya, or if whoever is fighting Dricus, hopefully something goes wrong there in that prep, whether it's a rematch with Strickland or what have you. And let's see Brendan Allen get the short notice replacement and fight Dricus du Plessis. I know a lot of people, including myself, are a little bit disappointed with Brendan Allen's performance here. I was really hoping he could get the finish, but all in all, he got a win over a more than decent fighter in Chris Curtis. All right, moving on to the co-main event, Alexander Hernandez versus Damon Jackson. All I really learned from this fight is that Alexander Hernandez is not very good at all. I don't think he really even goes into his fights anymore with a game plan. He just hopes that he can use his quick burst lunging forward 1-2 shot like the one he knocked out Beneil Dariush with. It looks like that's just the only dangerous thing in his game, and that's the only thing that he sets up. Everything else is simply arbitrary leg kicks that aren't leading to any other combinations. And it's not like he doesn't have a front kick. It's not like he doesn't have high kicks. It's not like he doesn't have these other tools in his game. He's just ego, athleticism, and no real MMA IQ. I think the guy is a decent enough grappler to where he could secure takedowns on guys like Damon Jackson. I think he's got good enough kicks to where he could really start throwing them at different levels so it could mess with his opponent's guard, and then he could incorporate his straight punches off of that. But there's no targeting game plan. There's no misdirections that he throws into his combinations to set up his other shots. The guy's just so arbitrary, man. Alexander Hernandez is such an NPC name already, but what an NPC of a fighter, man. Good for Damon Jackson, I guess, getting a win and staying in the UFC. His hairline is making a comeback, so good for Damon Jackson. All I can really say about Damon Jackson's performance in this fight was that he had better body language. He took the center of the octagon more. He was attempting takedowns. Damon Jackson was just hungrier here, and he won the body language battle. Neither of these guys went life or death in this fight. Go for Damon Jackson getting the win here. Moving on to Chepe Mariscal versus Morgan Schreier. I picked Chepe to get the win here, and he did. This was a very close fight as well. But at the end of the day, I think Chepe Mariscal just ended up outworking Schreier and getting the more significant shots as the fight went on, especially in the clinch with knees and elbows. Chepe did a good job in the grappling exchanges here as well. Schreier has got some very good kicks, and he's very strong. He's kind of got like a Melvin Manhoof build at featherweight. So he's just very short, stocky, powerful kicker and puncher. I just don't like the fact that he has like this SoundCloud rapper haircut and he's also from France. Like, dude, you're not intimidating anybody. And call it personality, call it self-expression. You're also trying to be a UFC fighter, no? So, I don't know. Maybe don't try and personify yourself and embody a SoundCloud rapper at the same time. Okay? Mr. 19 and 10. I'm sure he could get maybe a win or two here or there in the UFC, but Morgan Charrera really isn't here to do business. Chepe Mariscal seems like a tough veteran fight for anybody. He really coming up. Allowed this was a close Ignacio fight. To Chepe get got into the win. A good rhythm. Moving on Ignacio Bahamondes versus Christos Giagos. Once in he my gets prediction video, at the end of his jab, Ignacio and he's able to set things advantage here. Like he just took care of spinning side kick to the body, which he hit Giagos with in his midsection, and it really hurt Giagos. Once you have a guy like Bahamondes in that sort of rhythm, if you're not closing the distance, it's only a matter of time. Eventually, as Giagos is circling to his right, Bahamondes throws a beautifully timed, high IQ, lead leg high kick, absolutely smacks Giagos upside the head, and knocks him out. At the end of the day, Giagos had a very low IQ performance, if I'm going to be honest here. I want to see Bahamondes do well in his career because I really like to see these long and lanky guys fulfill their potential. So I would like to see him up against somebody like Joel Alvarez. You know, Joel Alvarez is the same sort of build at lightweight as Bahamondes. And I know the UFC loves matching up. They love matching up guys with similar styles up against each other. It shows you who's better at executing that game plan or who has more tools outside of that game plan to get the win. So I think Ignacio Bahamondes versus Joel Alvarez would be a very interesting fight. We also have a few other long and lanky lightweights in the UFC right now. So I would say put Bahamondes up against one of those. I don't think Bahamondes is really a top 15 UFC level fighter. He really needs to show a dangerous submission game if we're going to actually think about him as a problem in the top 15 at 155, because if you're not well-rounded everywhere, you're not going to get into the UFC top 15. Bahamondes, beautiful performance. Trevor Peek versus Charlie Campbell. All the real ones were picking this to be the real main event of the night, and that's what it was. I mean, they really put on a barn burner of a fight. Trevor Peek, like I predicted, he's got a great personality, great accent, crazy jawline, amazing fighting style, great personality outside of the cage. But he simply lacks the defensive fundamentals when it comes to getting into the striking exchanges. Charlie Campbell simply was more composed, more technical, was working better from the outside with his leg kicks and his longer distance weapons, was able to wear the storm of Trevor Peek, took everything Trevor Peek threw at him, and gave Trevor Peek some great shots back. So a really well-seasoned performance by Charlie Campbell. Charlie Campbell seems like a really great dude. He's 2-0 in the UFC. He can seriously crack. So definitely a dangerous striker for the lightweights outside of the top 15. I'm interested to see how far Charlie Campbell goes in the UFC. Trevor Peek, I would think, should really go to the UFC PI, start working with other fighters, focusing on his game more, being a student of the game, and just starting to grow as a fighter, because I want to see Trevor Peek stay in the UFC. Next up, my dude Alex Morono, the Great White. I mean, bro, Alex Morono seriously worries me with his knees. Like, this dude looks like he's walking on two wooden pegs out there. The way that he just bounces and shuffles around the cage, it looks like he's got some really bad knee problems. But at the end of the day, the guy is so high IQ as a UFC fighter. He throws a extremely well-timed, well-camouflaged overhand right. He has good takedown attempts, good takedown defense. He knows what he's doing on the ground. He has good leg kicks. He has a good guard. He's not easy to hit. Alex Morono is extremely awkward to watch. He doesn't have the prettiest looking style, But at the end of the day, Alex Morono just showed an ability to have a higher volume game plan, get in range and out of range quickly and safely more than Court McGee. And he was able to hit Court McGee with some great overhand rights that certainly made the judges lean towards him. So Alex Morono, man, he's just got a great IQ for fighting in the UFC. He knows what judges like to see. He knows what keeps him safe in the octagon. He doesn't do anything stupid in the octagon. It's really hard for me to remember the last time Alex Morono did anything where you're like, what the hell is he doing? So Alex Morono, just a stud of a veteran, good passing of the torch moment for Court McGee, absolute legend of the sport, a former tough winner when tough actually meant something. Moving on to Lucas Brzeski versus Walter Walker. Man, I had high hopes. It's just too much to ask for getting a nice prospect at heavyweight, right? It's just way too much to ask. Walter Walker, I had high hopes for this guy. Walter Walker seemed like he was doing well in the grappling exchanges, but he simply had nothing for Brzeski on the feet. Brzeski essentially just neutralized enough of Walter Walker's game and was able to implement his hands enough on the feet that the judges were like, yep, this Walker guy really ain't doing anything in terms of damage, and Lucas Brzeski got the win. So, really unimpressive from both of them. Norma Dumont versus Germaine de Randamie. Now, I did not watch this fight, but congratulations, Norma, on your win. Pedro Falco versus Victor Hugo. Now, this fight got changed up after my picks video was recorded, but essentially Falco was trying to force the takedowns here. I thought he was doing a good job in terms of controlling the fight and the grappling. Victor Hugo was able to get enough success on the feet, nullify Falco's grappling attempts, so the judges gave it to Hugo. Not very technical fighters. Wasn't really impressed by either of them. I'm sure both of them will face a demise in the UFC soon. Moving on to Dan Argueta versus John Matsumoto. I was very concerned that this John Matsumoto kid was going to get the UFC jitters and essentially get out-wrestled for 3 rounds by Dan Argueta. I did pick John Matsumoto in this fight. I had seen his guillotine highlights from his regional fights, and his guillotine looked good because he's such a stocky kid in his upper body. So the guillotine looks really, really good when he has it on his opponents. I didn't think he was going to be able to get it on a guy like Dan Argueta when Dan Argueta trains with so many UFC level fighters. But John Matsumoto, in the closing seconds of round 2, literally with 2 seconds on the clock, snatches up this guillotine on Dan Argueta, and Dan Argueta goes out and they call the fight. Absolutely impressive performance by John Matsumoto. The kid is 15-0, and he's just got a finish in his UFC debut. So I'm very excited to see what John Matsumoto can do in the future. Bantamweight has got another great young up-and-coming prospect. Dylan Budka versus Cesar Almeida. Almeida's biggest chance in winning this fight would be by KO TKO. And I really thought it was going to be by him pressuring Budka up against the fence if Budka was to tire, and then timing him with like a big overhand right. That was the way I would see Cesar Almeida knocking out Budka here. But Budka was actually going for takedowns, trying to implement a good grappling game plan, completely unable to secure a dominant position and a submission. He showed he's quite low level when it comes to his ground game, Dylan Budka. He was going for a takedown in the second round. Cesar Almeida threw Travis Brown elbows. MMA IQ 101. Cesar Almeida wins. And that was our final fight on the night. We did not watch Melissa Dixon versus Nora Cornell because we do not cover WMMA here on Better MMA. Thank you for supporting Better MMA. Check out my previous prediction videos for the underrated fights on UFC 300. We're 7 days out of UFC 300, guys. It almost doesn't even feel real. Right now, I'm just praying, and we should all put our energy towards no weird referee stoppages, no weird injury stoppages. Let's just hope everybody makes weight and things go smoothly for UFC 300. Thank you guys so much for supporting Better MMA. We out.